Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And you can probably hear it a little bit, but for the first time in 3 or 4 years I caught a bug. Now I already did a test and luckily it's not the virus, so I probably just got a common cold, but I have to say when you haven't had anything like that in a while, it does put you under the weather. So we will try to get this EVE Talk rolling. And when it comes to news, well, we don't have that much news, of course. It is the holiday season, and so for all you guys out there, definitely enjoy your Christmas, enjoy your holiday seasons. And I hope that you are all, of course, healthy and well. On the news for the development, there's not a lot, but with the holiday seasons, we do have a lot of sales. We got an email that you get like 50% off of playtime plus a multiple pilot train certificate, and there should also be discounts on Steam for the winter sale. So we could see a bit of an impact on the market there. But other than that, I haven't really kept up. Of course, trying to get better is the focus at this point, so I don't have a lot of news to report. But we'll take a quick look, as always, to the New Eden store and see what's available here. So we of course have the Yule Star skins front and center, the really cool skins with a countdown towards the new year. And on the services front, we don't have any sales happening within the New Eden store, but if you go outside of the game to the website or to Steam, apparently there are discounts to be had there. So let's just jump into the market, and as always, we'll go to the pilot services first, coming in at 150. 150, there we go. And as always, we will start with the main item. Here is plex, and you can see we declined a little bit. I also think you can see a little bit of an increased volume there. So while it's not, of course, as abrupt as what we're seeing here when you get a sale directly within the New Eden store, I think that does drive a lot more quick trading, right? When you get to open up your wallet, it is a little bit different, but still we have a decline in the price of plex that is now substantially on the average price below 4.5 million and heading towards a 4.5 million range. In JITA itself, we're talking above 4.8 million for the sellers, 4.6 for the buyers. So again, they are dropping a little bit. And then for the trade hub, yeah, not a lot of action around JITA prices. So opening up a little bit of margin here, 250,000 is pretty much. And yeah, buyers trying to bring that price down, and of course the extra supply from sales should help keep us in check right now for plex. Next up, the multiple pilot train certificate, and we don't really see a big impact from the potential sale here. In fact, today's data point is closer to 2 billion, and volumes are really low at the moment. We're talking 1.9 billion for the sellers, but you can see one seller, then it's practically 2 billion for the others. So someone came in here to keep the market in check for today, but if those two sell, we're back at 2 billion for the prizes. And buyers, yeah, they're forced up here towards 1.8 billion. Still somewhat of a margin, but there's definitely a bit of desperation. If you want that training certificate, you gotta pay the ISK now. The skill extractors, same story as with plex, a pretty sizable decline in price at this point, which should have at some legs, or at least be able to maintain itself over the holidays, I think, with the potential sales that we got going there. 544 million for the sellers, 538 for the buyers, though. Big difference here between the skill extractors and the plex market, where we don't see an opening up of the market, of the margin between sellers and buyers, but they are very close to each other. I mean, that's just a 6 million difference, even less than that, on something that costs 500 million. That is very narrow. This does show that there is apparently demand for skill extractors, so I do expect a different picture in the injectors. Let's get going. Here are the large skill injectors, and yep, exactly. Woo, where does that come from? But pretty close to a 1 year high point for the large skill injectors. Bit of pressure at the tail end here, but very expensive. 920 million for the sellers, 875 for the buyers as well. This does to me feel like buying pressure. People that absolutely want those skill points for their characters. Very interesting, not what I expected before starting EVE Talk, but looking of course at what was happening with the extractor margin there, I did see some buying pressure. Small scale injectors, I don't think we'll really be able to bug that trend. Nope, exactly the same thing. Basically a little bit of a pullback at the tail end, but made its way over 190 million over the last week. We're at 187 for the sellers and 171 million for the buyers. A little bit more margin here on this one. Smaller item, but again you can also see the increased volumes. There's definitely very high interest for these injectors, and let's see if it's the same for the daily alpha injectors. Well, a bit of a surprise to me, volume wise not that much this week, price wise a bit of pressure on the upswing, but the 5-day moving average is really not moving. 47.5 million for the sellers, 40.5 million for the buyers. Definitely feels to me like it's a reasonable range that everyone should be pretty happy with. Less than 50 million on a daily basis for an alpha character. I can definitely see ways for you to get that, and it's a nice carrot for you to keep improving your character on a daily basis. Then finally we get the Hypercore that also shows a little bit of pressure. Even today's price is really starting to drop off, with buyers dropping out of the market as well. Yep, exactly. 509,510 for the sellers, 486 for the buyers. It's still a narrow margin, but you can see here within GDA itself there's not that many buyers, and so to me that does indicate that there is potentially some pressure here on the Hypercores and on Plex as well, with buyers dropping out. That could see prices basically either continue to drop or not necessarily make new high points anytime soon. That definitely feels like a little bit of a difference compared to just a couple of weeks ago, and especially after the expansion in November. And well, I think that there are outside forces. I mentioned a couple over the last few weeks, but now there's also the Steam Winter Sale. There's definitely some games there that are pretty interesting and might be giving players something else to do than EVE Online. Next up, the mineral market. 7 minutes on that one. And you can probably hear it, but I'm doing my best here, guys, to make the sound doable. But let's get started. Here is Tritanium. And well, we got those gains with the expansion, pushing us well above 4 ISK, and we're pretty much flat if you look at it from that perspective. So that's not bad. 436, 440 coming into play here for the sellers of Tritanium. Still 650 million that needs to be chewed through by the market, but we're able to maintain, so that's pretty good. And then 431 for the buyers, very narrow margin here between sellers and buyers. So a good price, I would still say. And if you're not sure if you want to sell everything, I don't blame you. Like a 50-50 approach or something like that for your Tritanium makes a lot of sense to me as well. Then we've got Pyrite, a little bit of pressure, but sort of the same story. Able to stay above 10 ISK is not bad. 1067 for the sellers, 1051 for the buyers here as well. Bit more volume for the sellers, so there is that slight pressure, but again, not a bad price if we look at this from the 1 year perspective, and not a great price either. So another, to me, 50-50, right? If you make Pyrite, I would sell half, keep the other half, hopefully for a better price later down the line. Then we get Mixalon, still below 70, so that's a little bit unfortunate. Definitely feels like it lost the most over the last couple of months, but that's of course relative as well from a price point of 90 ISK, so this is still not bad in my personal book. 66.31 for the sellers, 60.70 for the buyers, slightly more margin, right, getting close to that 10%, so you have to be a little bit careful. That downtrend may have a bit more legs. So for me, this one also basically puts it in that 50-50 perspective. Just for the perspective that here I see us losing more ground more quickly, and so the danger with that is that you want to cash out maybe some of your Mixalon just to get that ISK, and then you need the other Mixalon for a longer term than Tritanium Pyrite, where you perhaps hope that Nullsec can explode, lose some super capital, something like that, that can increase demand that way. But here you might want to basically take the ISK rather than keep the Mixalon. In Lowsec, we've got Isogen that's bouncing nicely off of the 400, so that's actually pretty impressive, right? Despite the perceived nerf to Isogen, to Megasite and to Zydrine as well, with the extra ores that have been introduced into the game. Actually, where is the ore seems to be the most common question on all of these videos. Honestly, I never went looking for them, but they should be in like AO type star systems, and I think up to 0.5 systems. I'm not exactly sure where they are, but they should then be close to the stars. So if they're absolutely not able to be found by a lot of you guys, that's interesting. It does show that perhaps their impact was overestimated a little bit by myself, by the market as well. And so here we see a nice recovery for Isogen, sellers coming back in at 483 and buyers forced up to 470 as well. Very narrow margin, pretty strong demand, and definitely a better price than just last week. Then for Noxium in low sec, I think they kind of agree with us, because with Zydran making its way back towards 500 disk, then keeping Nox below 1000 disk doesn't make that much sense, and so we jumped well above that all of a sudden as well. 1050 for the sellers, 9A still for the buyers. They're hesitant, but my read on this here is that the new ores were like maybe overestimated a little bit on their potential impact for the market. And as a result, I think buyers may be forced above 1000 disk for Noxium. And now I'm actually gonna have to blow my nose here for a second, so I'm gonna actually mute you guys because it could be bad. 1 sec. There we go. So let's go to nullsec. Here is Zydran. Still losing a little bit of ground, but basically stabilizing well above 2500 disk, 2770, so almost 2800 for the sellers, 26 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, kind of normal for a nullsec mineral as well, but basically not that big of an impact from those new minerals. And then Megasite is just plateauing at its highest range, so that one is just completely shrugging off that potential extra supply, bring it right in line with Zydran, 277 as well for the sellers, and an even more narrow margin, 2708 for the first buyer. So strong demand in the Tech 1 minerals for sure across the board. The high-sec ones of course have huge supply as well, so there I would consider a 50-50 approach. And if you can go out there to mine some Isogen, mine some Noxium, Megasite, Zydran, I think you do get quite a bit of reward for your risk at the moment. Finally, we've got Morphite tied to Tech 2, now substantially below 40,000, but today's daily average starting to go back up again. 40,800 for the sellers, 38,500 for the buyers. To get these average, basically more sellers have to come in on these buyers than to these sellers. So that's probably what was happening. You can also see here that sellers are starting to hesitate to bring more Morphite to the market at these prices. 77 days ago, so they definitely are holding off, trying to wait the market out for higher prices, and I think they will succeed. Morphite is also completely import dependent in the trade hubs, and so yeah, this is too low for those that are making and hoarding Morphite, and they are going to rectify that position by holding off on supplies. Very, very noticeable, and I do like this dynamic here that is very clearly shown. If there was active supply at the moment, then you would have like 89 days etc left here. Nope, 77 days. So ever since we went substantially below the 40k mark, the suppliers said no, that's not really what we want to see Morphite do, and so the demand side may be having some trouble as well, but you can see at the tail end here that they eventually will succeed, I think, to bring prices or to keep prices above 40k for Morphite. Next up, the PI market, 1355. So here with strong demand in minerals, I don't see any reason to think that the situation has changed. So let's get started. Broadcast nodes making its way back to 2 million, so showing strong demand for advanced PI materials, which is of course tied to those larger capital ships, where CCP even mentioned that they were introducing extra ores in order to solve bottlenecks in that part of industry. 2.2 million for the sellers, 175 for the buyers, so they've opened up a bit of margin here, but for now it looks like the sellers are back on the winning hand, and so we are going up in price. Construction blocks Right, minimum prices touching the 10k, but max prices going back up here as well. 11,900 for the sellers, almost 12,000 disc, 10,000 for the buyers. Again, opening up a bit of margin, but if we look at the chart here, it looks like the sellers are winning, and so demand is strong enough to keep the prices well in check. Pretty damn impressive in my book. Coolants then actually departing from 10,000 discs. So here, all of a sudden, we are back at 12,400 for the sellers, 10,000 still for the buyers. So another one where we open up a bit of margin, but the sellers are really able to get those very, very high prices for their PI materials, which is the reason why last week I went over to Amar as well, did some selling there, because I think these are just crazy times. Coolants super easy to make, super common planets, and yet 12,400, even historically I think a tremendously good price. Enriched uranium, same story I think, so 14,000 now here for the sellers, 12,850 for the buyers as well. Not that many buyers in GTI itself, so again we open up a bit of margin, so we could come into a more volatile period, but it's pretty obvious that it's very, very expensive. Integrity response drones, same thing, opening up a bit more margin on the 2.5 handle. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.6 for the buyers here. There just isn't enough supply, and buyers are forced into closing the gap. Then we've got our mechanical parts, touched 12,500, loses some ground, but you can see those averages are staying with the sellers. 11.9 for the sellers, 10.9 for the buyers. Very, very impressive, very expensive. Miniature electronics peaked to 20,000 disc on a day. That's kind of crazy. Down to 15.5, but 15.5 for refined. Super expensive. Buyers 14.2, no choice. Nano factories, that one is still stable, but you can see today's averages and the volumes here starting to pick up as well. Definitely running out, getting to 1 million for the sellers. Buyers still holding at that 800,000 disc range, but how long can they do that if there's not enough supply? Organic mortar applicators, 1 year high point, 1.24 million for the sellers, and again here, right, buyers 872, very hesitant to go up. They don't want this, but yeah, this is what's happening. And again, I sort of mentioned this, and so the picture that is being drawn here for me is that those new mineral sources are basically staying in nullsec, right? They're available in null, low sec mostly, especially for the megasite and the zydrine. And so while we're basically keeping prices in check in high sec, there's maybe a little bit more going around within the null sec market itself. But what I mentioned as well is that we could then be creating our next bottlenecks, which might be right here in PI, which could explain why organic mortar applicators making a 1 year high point despite a super strong summer already. An incredible fall where I decided to sell, and then now we're even higher on higher volumes as well. So then we get our recursive computing modules, 1 year high point as well, going up to 1.5 million, 1 million for the sellers. So opening up a margin there, right? That's 50% between sellers and buyers. That's quite significant. But again, those buyers, they're careful, but how long can they keep up and not buckle to the pressure from these sellers? It's going to be very, very difficult. And then robotics, damn, still not at 100k, but I think with the momentum from everything else, we're getting close. 98,400 for the sellers, 94.4 for the buyers. So we are definitely also at the 1 year high point range. Rocket fuels, 1 year high point yet again. 13.8 for the sellers, 13,000 for the buyers. Super expensive. Self-harmonizing power cores, back above 225 on the chart, 227 for the sellers, 224 for the buyers. Look at that narrow margin, nothing at all. Super strong demand here as well. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. And then the difference, of course, right? Why are we seeing, for instance, in high-sec minerals being, well, okay, but definitely like oversupplied when you compare the volumes between sellers and buyers, and yet here for PI, you do get that super strong competition within JIDA itself. And for mega sites, right, what I'm presuming now is that competition is not happening within JIDA, and the lower price are not within JIDA, but the increased availability stays within nullsec itself, where the ships are being built. And that is of course because PI can be built anywhere. You could, right next to JIDA, you could set up a planet that is going to make these specialized PI materials as well. And so here we do have that competition that is probably raging across the entirety of New Eden, that strong demand for PI materials. Smart fab units 86,500 to 76,000, but clearly super expensive as well on the chart. Sterile conduits here staying well above, and we basically have to catch up here because sellers are heading for 1.5 million, buyers sort of giving up. 1.2 million coming into play here as well. Then we get our supercomputers. Oh, and I think I usually do go like this. Yep, there we go. Then we get our supercomputers also edging closer and closer to 100k, 19,400 and 89,500. A little bit more margin there, but still the trend is clear. Synthetic oil 11,000 easy for the sellers, 10,200 for the buyers. Normal margin. Synthetic synapses back on the upswing as well, could be tied as well to the event that's happening here, but 125,000, wish we could see that for our robotics. I'd be switching to robotics planets right away, but 111,500 for the buyers as well. So here clearly more demand than supply, and a lot of demand out there. Transcranial microcontrollers back below 100,000, but only by a little and very narrow margin. Water-cooled CPU then touched 10,000 disk, full recovery from the good old days where refined PI materials managed to demand 10,000 disk across the board. 9.5, bit of supply coming in here with some big volumes, but still 9,000 disk for the buyers. The demand is here. And then wetware mainframes sort of confirming the analysis in my book. 1 year high point, 2.5 million for the sellers, 2.4 million for the buyers. And yeah, we will see of course how CCP will react to this, because personally I think this will be on their radar next. I do get the feeling now, looking at the mineral prices, that the change, right, the extra ores that were brought in there is not like a sweeping change that is going to completely crater or change the dynamic. It probably just like injects a little bit where it's the worst, but for PI we can see that it's pretty much across the board that we have extremely high prices, new 1 year high points as a mineral bottlenecks gets fixed. So I would not be surprised if we see a more sweeping change coming in to solve PI and to allow for more production, construction within nullsec, or if that's not the goal, of course, because the part of the equation there is how do you keep value when you just make increase availability more and more. So it is a gamble, but for me it is definitely selling time, because if there's anything that's going to happen, in my opinion, it is that CCP will hit this, but we will see, right? That's pure speculation on my part, and so I may have unloaded even too early, but we will see. Then we've got advanced moon materials next, 23 minutes. That. All right, let's get going. So let's see if the recovery holds on this one. So another CCP intervention, as most of you probably know. They nerfed the output from moon mining by 25%, and here was that response in December, right, when we were basically happy that we were above 100 disk for crystalline carbonite. Now we are above 150, and we're here to stay. I think 157 to 155 for Caldari. Titanium carbide peaked to a 1 year high point on the chart. Now probably we come from even higher before this, but still this is now a 1 year high point on the chart, down to 170 and 166, so very narrow margin, losing a bit of ground, but still Basically, with CCP's intervention, we get a full recovery. And another thing to keep in mind here is that CCP is willing to play the other side as well. Make sure that those that mine moon mining stuff maintain some value within their cargo hold. And so here we do have a full recovery for at least for titanium carbide, because Amar was lagging behind. But let's start with Minmatar, of course. Here is Fernite carbide, also right in the second leg, a little bit later than the others, but made its way to 150. 145 to 110, so a little bit more margin and room to fall back, but basically full recovery here as well. And then titanium, tungsten carbide, excuse me, for Amar, same story, 147 to 115, a bit more margin, a little bit slower to respond, but here it is, also fully recovered on the 1 year basis. So CCP basically came in, nerfed moon mining, and gave these carbides back their value from before. They, I think, doubled yields across the board for all mining out in New Eden. So definitely something that, well, we could have risked. There were some really nice opportunities to jump in, and I've got some, but it's not in the carbides, it's in the metamaterials. So let's get going on these. Galente, it's photonic metamaterials. Alright, not a full recovery yet. We bounced to 12.5 and we're back below 10,000. That's not such good news. Then we've got Caldari, non-linear metamaterials. Same story, we went up to 15k on the 5-day moving average, down to 11.6, 11,000 for the buyers. For Minmatar, it's plasmonic metamaterials, also far more limited. And then for Amar, terahertz metamaterials, bit of a bump, but also losing 50% of that bump over the second week. So my gamble, I mean, it will still pay off, right? I'm definitely making some ISK because I bought like below 10,000 ISK, but it's not as good a recovery as for the carbides. Let's go to the rest of the list. Yeah, also recovery, of course, in most of these. Fermionic condensate landing on 50k. Most of them losing a little bit of ground from the initial bump, but definitely staying at a higher range. Ferrogel 25,000, 24. Fullerites having a tougher time here, making its way to 600, but you can see it doesn't feel as structural, so we'll see if it can maintain that. Hypersynaptic fibers, also definitely an in-between spot. Nanotransistors doing a second leg, 365. 3,650 for the sellers, 3,420 for the buyers. Definitely the best price in the last 9 months or so. Phenolic composites did a 1 year high point, loses a little bit of ground, but 1,500, basically full recovery on a 1 year basis. Pressurized oxidizers also recovered. Reinforced carbon fiber, actually 1 year high point right now. So if you gambled on the reinforced carbon fibers, you bought 7.5 or below, you're selling for 13,700 ISK. That's a pretty nice profit margin. And then ceramic fibers, yeah, a decent recovery, but nothing too crazy on that one. Yeah, advanced moon materials, that's the story. We can basically expect most of these to recover to the prices they had about a year ago, it seems. But yeah, the ones that I gambled on, which is the metamaterials, are definitely not doing that. Next up, Tech 2 ships coming in at 27.35. Damn. Alright, let's go for the Basilisk first of all. So this one also not as big a move as some of the raw materials, and you can see how those minimum prices are dipping back. 132 for the sellers, 106 for the buyers. So here I think that the Tech 2 market might be struggling with just not enough buyers out there, despite the fact that it feels really cheap. I think we're coming from so many months where this now feels like an expensive Basilisk to pay 130 plus million for the sellers, but we will see how it evolves. Of course, I'm sort of hoping that we can see increased volatility. Cerberus also starting to lose a little bit of ground on that, 131 to 118. So this is maybe a chart where you might want to buy, yeah, actually, yeah. Buying a Basilisk below 110 million, to me that makes a lot of sense, especially if you look at what's happening in the advanced moon materials. Curse, that's pretty damn nice, touch 200 million, comes back down a bit, 170 for the sellers, but there's definitely And one of my PCs starting to blow all of a sudden really hard, but oh, there we go. He recovered. Hope that didn't come through too much. But alright, so the curse still definitely in sell territory compared to the buys that you could have had over the last 6 to 9 months. But nothing like too spectacular just yet. Damnation making its way to 300 million ISK. Yep, 298 for the sellers, 263 for the buyers. So here again, buy below 250. That was a noticeable 1-year low point, and you've got a pretty nice trade. Again, I need to see more volatility. I think the potential is there, but we probably need to get through the existing supplies and the lack of demand. We have to push through that inertia phase before it can happen. The Deacon still very, very cheap, below 14 million. And man, my PC is really having some problems, but only lost for a moment. I'll have to check that after finishing the video. So here's the Eagle actually dropping off very quickly again. Buyers are down to below 110. So another, in my opinion, buy opportunity. But if we can then get those spikes to 150 to come in, there's the volatility that we want to see. EOS stuck at 300 million, so that's not what we want to trade. Aries 40 million, that's not a great chart. Although again, I know buyers are actually starting to go back up here. Flycatcher holding in no man's land. Guardian, nope. Heretic, there we go, a sell opportunity, guys. Back to 50 million ISK, 48 for the sellers, 35 for the buyers. Could have bought these for 30 million several times over the last 4 months or so. Volume's dropping off, so you gotta be fast on this one. But here is our sell opportunity, and here is that volatility. So I need to see more of this, and now I need to see, whoa, sellers are seeing heretics for 50 million, 45 million. Let's bring in too many of them. Let's put that price back down to 30 million where we can jump in, and then sellers deciding or maybe finding other ships to make and to produce, and hopefully that dynamic in Tech 2 can start to work. Then of course my holdings, because I have quite a few Tech 2 ships, will start to go up in value. The Hound, no man's land, buyers dropping off again though, still not below 15 million. I'd wait for that or hope for that. Then we get the Ikitursa back up actually substantially. 583 million for the sellers, 525 for the buyers. Definitely a bit more expensive here as well. Ishtar still above 150, so that's a no. Kirin, yeah, I don't know. Manticore, so I do like the stealth bombers myself. Buyers are at 15.7. Supplies, that's decent. That's decent. Putting some pressure on the price. You can see that on the minimum prices here. So maybe worth it to keep an eye on this one as well. Nemesis, no man's land, right in between, 15.8 to 14 million. Nighthawk back at 300 as well. Oneros, nope, not a jumping point. Here we go. Purifier, buyers are below 15 million, 14.5. Too much supply, clearly, right? Almost all of this is like 30, 50, 60, 70, almost 100 purifiers in the last 24 hours. An oversupply, this does create a buy opportunity. And then of course, if they need to move their production to some ships that are more expensive, maybe especially if they want to make more battle cruiser that sucks up more of these supplies that are just not available at the old prices anymore, and yeah, Purifier looks like an option if of course volatility does show up again. The Rook, that's another no. For me, Saber 42 to 37. I don't like the chart. Scalpel, no. Scimitar, nope. Sleipnir making its way back above 300 million as well. So here, buy below 250, sell for 320 million. Definitely a trade. So it's not as spiky as what we would like to see, but I am starting to see those first signs that volatility may be coming back. Vagabond, unfortunately, that's a no. And then the Zarmast is stuck below 500 million as well. But alright, for Tech 2, I would say start actively looking a little bit more at trading. I think there are a couple ships where if you want to take profits, you can do so. And then you have to start to decide on your strategy, I think, for what the chart or the situation where you would want to jump in, looking and hoping for a bit more volatility and thus faster turnover of your trade. I think that's what I am starting to look for in the Tech 2 ship market. Now we'll need a little bit of patience. Again, my take on why we haven't seen that yet is because there is inertia in this. There are a lot of ships still out there that need to find owners, maybe need to be destroyed and things like that. And at the same time, demand just isn't there yet for Tech 2. They've been used to those really low prices for a while, so they're not willing to dive in too hard just yet. But eventually, I think that production will slow down, become more expensive, and that then we'll have a good chance that volatility makes its way back in Tech 2 ships. Next up, the Tech 3 ships, 34, 35. Alright, and let's get started with the destroyers. Confessor, still not moving. See minimum prices stuck in the same range for the last 2 months or so, and sellers actually closing the gap, 46 to 43 million. Too much availability is great, basically, which means maybe too much supply or not enough interest, and that's the story. Hecate, alright, first bit of change here, definitely a different vibe to this market, up to 55 million for the sellers, 50 million for the buyers. Now I'm going to say probably due to the winter event, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think the Hecate will have a place in there. That's the only, or maybe, no, the volumes are not enough, I think, for like a big alliance buy or anything like that. So I think that may be it, maybe even manipulation. I mean, 181, that could be a just complete replacing of the market, but it feels like the uptick is too slow for that. So I'm thinking winter event, possibly the reason why the Hecate is high enough. But then I think everything else, if everything else is anemic, and the Jackdaw has a bit of pressure down to 45 million, so that should give the Hecate plenty of breathing room. And finally, this Vapel, just a bit more spread, but the average prices is stuck right here, just above 40 million. I basically think that the Hecate market will easily absorb this, and that will just slowly land back on the 50 million and be back where we started without really creating that volatility that we would need for trade. Again, the same story. Why go for a tactical destroyer when you can still basically get far cheaper options in Tech 2 ships? I think that's still the problem. Now for the cruisers, it's a bit of a different story. So here is the Legion. We all noticed that sell opportunity above 200 million not that long ago, so buy 160, sell 200, and now we are going down. We need a bit more momentum in my opinion, but buyers down to 170, that's potentially pretty nice. Still 185 for the sellers, but we've got the momentum, so I do think you have a slight chance of picking up a very cheap Legion already. You may be early though, of course, because the 160 is what we would like to see to jump in and definitely make a profit. Then we get the Loki, and this is so the bug for today's minimum price that always shows up a little bit wrong, but we're back below 200 million, 197 for the sellers, 183 for the buyers, so we need a little bit more time to see where we are heading or to see if we get a jumping point. But the Legion is starting to show that potential. And man, what's wrong with my PC? Then we get the Proteus, still making its way back up above 200 million. No, very close to that, 198 to 182. I think could be event driven as well. Tech 3 ships make sense there. And then the Tengu is starting to get stuck at that high range. 192 to 181. I think same story here. Winter Nexus might have something to do with a little bit of extra demand, which does make the Legion chart quite juicy in my opinion. If you can buy close to 170, maybe just above that, I do think you potentially have a jumping point, because the Winter Nexus event does still last for a pretty long time, if I'm not mistaken, up into January. So we may be in a situation where, well, Loki, Tengu, Proteus remain pretty expensive, and then maybe the Legion will have to do a bit of a catch up to higher prices. Because it just never gets enough breathing room really to go back down to a 160 or something like that. So maybe jumping in on a Legion could be the move to make. And then just to give myself a little bit of time, the extra product for the week is just going to be the Gecko. That's coming in at 38.40. like that. And part of the reason for that is that I noticed in Amar that I actually still hold half a dozen of these as well. And even on the chart that's not that great, we can see that evolution is starting to go in the right direction. Inflation is back. 120 million for the sellers, 109 for the buyers. So compared to just a couple months ago when we were structurally below 100 million, we have started to move up and we're basically at a 1 year high point range. So now the gamble is always, when will CCP come back with more Gecko availability to crash these prices? But we are now looking really good for Gecko investors on the 1 year chart. And I think if you bought below 100 million, you're already looking at close to a 20% profit. That is not bad. And this is one of those, yeah, in my opinion, gold bar type items, because you can't just make more geckos into the game right now unless CCP comes out and makes them a reward or drops PPCs or something like that. They are very expensive, and that just means you've got some sort of guarantee of a value increase cycle for the Gecko. And right now we are basically at a high point for them. It could go higher, of course. It all depends, as I mentioned, as to when CCP decides to come out with more Geckos, and that's always the gamble, right? Trying to time this market is difficult, but I personally like to just hold them and then try to buy at low prices. I think, you know, you can see when an event is there, all right, there's more geckos, let's grab a couple more. But now, right, the value of them is really nice, and that also did shine through on my character values. Unfortunately, we don't get a personal video for our characters this year for looking back at a year in EVE Online. But yeah, I've been doing some more selling, so I'm getting close to 150 billion in ISK in my wallet, liquid ISK, and the value of my character was at 450 billion as well for my main with all the stuff. So yeah, it's going really well, and I hope you guys again have a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and then I'll see you guys next week, and then we'll get going for 2023, the year where EVE Online becomes 20 years old. Thank you very much for watching and listening, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.
She will try